Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I think good morning for John. I will begin. We are a couple of minutes past our time. It's a fabulous evening for us because we are being able to welcome a guest speaker across oceans from United States. It's Dr. John Drake, who is the author for the textbook that we are using for our subject, Is It 204 E-Business Principles this term. Dr. John Drake is from East Carolina University. He is an associate professor there on management information systems. He holds a BS in physics from Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, and a PhD in management of information technology and innovation from Auburn University. His research has been published in journals such as AIS Transactions on HCI, Journal of Business Ethics, IEEE Transactions on Professional Communication, Journal of Information Technology Theory and Application, Journal of Theoretical and Applied Electronic Commerce Research. His current research interest focuses on thinking and morality with information systems, exploring social media privacy, search strategies, online education, general business ethics. A second research stream focused on virtual teamwork, exploring the role of trust, risk, virtuality of teams in successful completion of their projects. And he also runs a very successful podcast titled Voices of E-Commerce. Today, we are excited to have Dr. Drake talk to us about successful online businesses and the role of different stakeholders. As e-business principles students, most of you have been going through a lot of different topics, understanding and learning about e-businesses, e-commerce, and all the different things, how it works, how businesses work, how businesses survive. The pandemic, of course, made it imperative for businesses to move their work online to weather things like the lockdowns, the social distancing, and so many other storms that came from the beginning of 2020, and it still seems to be continuing on. I, for instance, today am down with COVID, but thankfully this session is virtual, so I'm being able to host it for you all. In this midst, many startups emerged, while some even established businesses actually collapsed. So we're really interested to hear from Dr. Drake today, who's going to be focusing on how successful online businesses work and the role of their stakeholders and what those stakeholders do in order to make these businesses successful. So, Dr. Drake, it's an absolute pleasure to have you join us here today. And we're going to keep having students joining in. Students, I think everywhere are, yeah, students being students. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for giving us the time. I know it's a really odd hour for you, but we are hoping doing it towards the evening has kind of helped a little bit. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Khan. Thank you again for inviting me. It's an honor. And to be honest, this is my first international talk that I have given, so I'm really excited about being here and talking with you guys today. And so, yeah, the topic that Dr. Khan asked me to speak on was stakeholders. And so I wanted to give you, actually, I want to start with a little story from my personal life. So 23 years ago, I began my journey in e-commerce, working with a startup company in the United States. The company introduced a novel approach to online sporting news, at least at the time. We crafted weekly video and audio commentary on American football teams and baseball teams. And it was, technologically, the website was absolutely amazing. And the design, oh man, it was beautiful. Like every day, one of the people on our staff would update the homepage with this beautiful image of some of the players and really make it just crystal clear and sharp. And it was great. Our marketing team, we had a great team of professionals who helped launch our brand nationwide. And all signs looked like this was going to be a company posed for success. There was one problem. We had no income. So after 12 months of hard work, our company ran out of its investment money, and they couldn't pay our salaries anymore. So late in the year 2000, I and the rest of the employees of this company were laid off. So what happened? where did these business executives who did such an amazing job with the rest of the business make their mistake? Yeah, I mean, so you have to understand that their plan, and they had a good plan, was to capitalize on the growing use of broadband technologies and the growing interest in online advertising by offering advertisements on these video commentary that they were creating. However, our executives miscalculated. While advertising was starting to appear as early as 1999 and 2000 when this company was started, most businesses weren't comfortable with it yet. You have to remember, this was only a year after Google was founded and 5 years before Facebook was founded. So two of these tech giants that today we think of as these huge marketing companies, or huge advertising companies, they weren't doing it yet. And so the executives of our company didn't understand these other businesses and their context yet. They thought they saw the advertising, they thought they saw the trends, but they really didn't understand it well enough. There was a failure to understand these important stakeholders to their company that the company failed. So it was from this experience and many others like it that led me to write my textbook, eCommerce, a Stakeholder Approach, because I began to see a common problem across many businesses, organizations, and projects. Problems that you'll likely encounter when you go out into the business world. Websites that become successful do so because of the individuals making good decisions across multiple different areas. Right? And that's really the essence of the lesson I want you to take away from today. Websites that become successful do so because of individuals making good decisions across multiple different areas. And there's a more fundamental truth behind this. As the philosopher Ayn Rand states, wealth is the product of man's ability to think. And it's that ability to think that is instrumental to success of whatever you're doing, websites, apps, mobile phones, computers, cars, airplanes, companies, and even your life. So the obvious question you should ask yourself is how? How do I think? Well, I mean, that sounds like a trivial question, and a lot of you are like, well, yeah, I already know how to think. But it only requires two things. You have to know the facts, and you have to apply reason. And the more facts that you know or have access to, the better your foundation is. And then once you acquire those facts, you have to develop a conceptual understanding of the world and then apply those concepts to whatever problems you're currently facing. And that sounds simple. It's not. So how do you know which facts are right? I mean, you may have heard of things such as misinformation or disinformation. If you start with inaccuracies, your conclusions will automatically be wrong. How do you ensure your reasoning is correct? You don't have time or energy to necessarily to think through everything, every single decision you have to make. It's just simply limited by our time. So sometimes we need to make quick decisions, which requires cognitive shortcuts. Other times you base your decisions on assumptions. And how do you know those assumptions are right or wrong? Well, that requires more thinking, right? Well, in fact, in the psychology literature, they've identified over 300 different types of cognitive biases that can impact your decisions. And some of these you may have heard of, some stuff such as confirmation bias, which tends to be a tendency to search for and recall information that already confirms what you already believe. Or framing bias, where you make decisions based on the way information is presented or framed as opposed just on the facts. Or you may have heard of the bandwagon bias or bandwagon effect, where it's the tendency to adopt certain behaviors, styles, or attitudes just because everyone else is doing it. Now, you might be thinking at this point, well, yeah, certainly there are a lot of biases out there, and I know a lot of people that have those biases, but you are probably pretty good at avoiding them, right? Well, everyone believes that same thing. And there's another bias that's called the blind spot bias that addresses that. The truth is, we all have biases, including myself. right? And the sooner you own that, the better you can be. Well, and here's the thing, it's like, just because everyone has these biases and just because everyone struggles with thinking, doesn't mean we should just give up on being objective. It doesn't mean that we can assume everyone's irrational and everything's subjective and we should just throw everything out the window. No, it's not lost. And I think looking at the world around us, we can see like all this incredible innovations and incredible things that people create shows that we can still be objective and can still do well. But the question is how, right? So some of my previous research focused on how to overcome these biases, and it's a process called debiasing. And in our research, we discovered there were several strategies that can help debias our thinking process, strategies that help us make good decisions more consistently. Strategies such as decomposing a task into smaller bite-sized tasks, or requiring consensus of a group of people. That's one reason why we do a lot of teamwork. Creating awareness of our biases can sometimes overcome those biases. But there was one strategy, the one that we saw most consistently across a lot of other researchers, that is most often helpful in debiasing, is taking different perspectives. It is this debiasing strategy, taking different perspectives, that inspired my focus on stakeholders in both in my teaching and in my textbook. And that's something I think you should focus on too. So stakeholders basically encapsulate these different perspectives. These are stakeholders are basically anybody that has an important stake in the success of a project or whatever you're working on, right? It helps to make the perspective real by taking these different perspectives, so that you can understand the individual making the decisions. Once you can see the context of these stakeholders, you can better appreciate their needs and wants. You can better understand their assumptions. You can think in their terms. And this gives you like a superpower, like the power to approach a problem from different perspectives, to see the whole problem and not just part of the problem. So I was recently rereading a great book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And if you get a chance, read it. I can't speak highly enough about it. But there was a story in there that really brought home this point to me. And so I want to tell you this, so give me please bear with me for a minute while I read through this. It's just, again, short, it'll take only a couple minutes. And it's about a gentleman that was in the Navy and he had this experience. And it starts, 2 battleships assigned to the training squadron had been at sea on maneuvers in heavy weather for several days. I was serving on the lead battleship and was on watch on the bridge as night fell and the visibility was poor with patchy fog. So the captain remained on the bridge, keeping an eye on all activities. Shortly after dark, the lookout on the wing of the bridge reported, "Light bearing on the starboard bow." "Is it steady or moving astern?" the captain called out. The lookout replied, "Steady, Captain," which meant we were on a dangerous collision course with that ship. The captain then called to the signalmen, "Signal that ship. Tell them we are on a collision course. Advise you change course 20 degrees. Back came the signal. "Advisable for you to change course 20 degrees. Captain said, "Send back another message. I'm a captain, change course 20 degrees. Message came back. "I'm a seaman 2nd class. You had better change course 20 degrees. Well, by that time, the captain was furious. He spat out, "Send! I'm a battleship, change course 20 degrees. Back came the flashing light. "I'm a lighthouse." We changed course. So that was the end of the story. But don't you think the captain made a much, much better decision to change course once he understood the perspective of the other person and the facts surrounding their advice. And that is where the lesson lies. You may be entirely convinced you are correct, and your thinking is flawless, and perhaps it is flawless based on your current knowledge, but you may be missing key facts that the other perspective can help you see. In fact, this happens far more often than most of us like to admit. The truth is, taking different perspectives makes us better thinkers. So what might this look like for you? Many of you are computer science and engineering students, presumably. And so you know technology really well, or at least you should by the time you graduate. And that's part of your training, after all. Technology, however, is only one of 4 primary stakeholders in any technical innovation. Whether you're doing a website or an app or a game or whatever innovation you're creating. The other 3 stakeholders are the manager, the marketer, and the user. And there may be a lot of secondary stakeholders as well, but I just want to focus on those for today's talk. Because each of these stakeholders brings a different perspective to technology development. Perspectives that can mean the difference between success and failure of a technology. So let's talk about the first one, the manager. Now, managers, you probably have an idea basically what a manager does. Manager manages work, right? In most simplest terms. They define what work needs to get done, what resources are necessary to accomplish that work, who is going to do that work, how to ensure that the work is accomplished. And to do all that, they have to do things like develop visions, set objectives, define standards, organize teams, refine processes, establish goals, check progresses, inspire efficiencies, govern decisions, and promote excellence. In essence, they manage systems, not an information system made up of computers, software, networks, but a business system made up of offices, processes, and people like you, all right? So as you go out into the workforce, managers will become a big part of your life. And the better you understand their perspective, the better you'll be able to make decisions within your place of employment. So take project management, for example. And so perhaps one of the most classic examples of a project management failure occurred in the 1960s. And so if you know much about the computing history, then I'm going to focus a little bit on IBM here. So IBM conceived, and they were already in the 1960s, one of the first and earliest developers of the computing technology. And IBM in the 1960s conceived of a new architecture to computing that would take advantage of the concept of a platform. So their plan was to develop a line of computers that use standardized hardware such that peripherals could be swapped out from one device to another. Now, this was an original concept. No one had been doing this yet. And this concept turned into what was called the System 360, which is a line of, I believe, 7 different computers, or maybe it went up to 9 after a short while, of different quality and processing power. It was ambitious in its scope, but promised phenomenal advantages to its customers. And when IBM made the announcement about the new line of computers, orders flooded in. And according to the article I read, it was over 100,000. I know you're probably thinking, well, 100,000 computers isn't very many. But to put this in perspective, again, this was the 1960s. There were only about 20,000 computers in existence at that time. So it went from 20,000 to 100,000 new orders of computers. So basically 6 times the growth in computing in computing in the world was going to happen just because of this one design. Right? Now, the operating system for this new line of computers, which was called the OS 360, was also developed from scratch just for this project. And like the hardware, the software was also very ambitious in its scope and what it's trying to accomplish. So here's where the project management component comes in. In 1963, the development on this OS was in complete disarray and way, way behind schedule. And so a gentleman by the name of Larry Brooks, he was a software engineer by training, was brought in to lead the project and finish it on time. So Larry, just, because it was so far behind schedule, Larry hired 1,000 new programmers to help finish the project. He did this on the premise that a certain amount of work needed to be done, so adding new employees would help it get done faster. It's a classic engineering solution, not a managerial solution. And all of these new hires had to be trained, managed, and integrated into the existing work teams. After Larry spent millions of dollars in salaries on these new programmers, bringing them on board, getting them trained, the software development continued to stall. In fact, it still ended up getting done late, way behind schedule, and pushing back when they could finally release these new systems. As Larry would later lament in his now famous book, The Mythical Man Month. Again, if this is kind of a classic, but really, really good book, a lot of you should check out. Software project management is not just about hiring good people and telling them to work. Adding more employees to a software project that's already behind schedule creates its own inefficiencies in terms of training and communication that can make a project take even longer. Unlike hardware projects, software projects are entirely intellectual. There are no physical principles to ground your decisions. And there are no laws about assumptions to make. There's only laws of logic. But logic can be put together in a bunch of different ways. How logical arguments are strung together in thoughts requires extensive communication, collaboration, and sometimes even debate. Adding more employees makes the communication, collaboration, and debate more extensive, not less. And that is the reason why it ended up taking so much more time for them to complete their project, even with all those additional programmers brought on board. Now, obviously, IBM still ended up being very successful. The System 360 went on to be a huge commercial success for them. But this is more in despite the problems with development rather than because of what happened in that project. And hopefully you'll take that lesson away about when managing people, this is something you should be aware of. All right, so let's talk about the second stakeholder, the marketer. So the goal of marketing is to sell products in a market. But first you have to understand what are your customers and what do they need. Working with, and oftentimes the marketers will work with production to develop products that meet those needs. And then they have to try to position products for the correct target markets and develop marketing plans to get the products to the customers. Right. It's a very sophisticated process they go through, and marketers often use different, frameworks to help think through their issues, such as something called the 4 Ps. And I don't know if any of you have even had a marketing class before, but the 4 Ps stand for product, price, place, and promotion. And sometimes they'll use something called the sales funnel, which basically says that if you're trying to create new customers, first those customers have to become aware of your product, and then they develop a positive impression about it that might lead them to make a purchase. And after they make a purchase, then you want to try to keep them coming back for repurchases. And then this sales funnel basically says that there's more people at awareness, fewer at positive impression, fewer at purchase, and even fewer at the repurchase level. But the efforts you make, you want to try to expand each of those levels. Otherwise, the funnel will create a stopgap that you can't get more customers in, and you end up not doing well. Now, here's the thing with marketing, though. When it fails, you usually don't hear about it because it failed, right? But there is one in particular that I was aware of because I was around when it was initially discussed. And this one occurs from 2009, a little bit more recent. So many of you are familiar with today's real-time virtual collaboration tools. Think of like Office 365 or Google Docs that can allow multiple people to work on the same document at the same time. Where did all this get started? And I don't know how many, you're probably not familiar with this original tool, but Google Wave. Google Wave was announced in 2009 and it promised to revolutionize all this real-time virtual collaboration that we take for granted today, right? And I know a lot of us are getting really comfortable now working virtually with each other. Well, when I first saw this product demo, so again, back in 2009, I was absolutely wowed with it. So it combined features of email, instant messaging, wiki technology, and even some social networking technologies, all rolled up into one. It was an absolute masterpiece of technology, combining synchronous and asynchronous communication in really useful ways. And it included a lot of additional technologies like your spell and grammar checks, your language translation, and all that. So it's things that today we think of as a really high-class tool, and it was doing this more than 10 years ago. So why haven't we heard about this? Within 2 years, Google abandoned support of Wave, and it leaves the question is why? I mean, the technology was phenomenal, revolutionary even, and it was abandoned. Well, in short, it was a marketing failure. So first, how did it fail? The tool seemed ideal for team collaboration, right? A great way for teams to get together and communicate and collaborate. But the release plan sent out single person invites. Now think about that. An individual might get access to this tool, Wave, but if they didn't have any of their own team members also on that collaboration, then it was pretty much useless to them, right? Second, and this was the leader of the Wave team, Lars Rasmussen, said a year after its launch, so 2010, that they were only just beginning to develop use cases for how the tool might be used. Well, essentially, he admitted that they had no clear positioning of the product for almost a year. They had no idea who's they were trying to get to use this product. You might say, yes, it was a team-focused tool, but what types of teams? Were they IT professionals? Were they teams of students? Well, they didn't make that clear, at least for a year after the launch. And what this, if they had positioned this, they could have made some simple tweaks to the requirements, and they could have positioned this tool, this product, much, much better for the right target customer. Wave lacked those customizations. And given those issues that I just mentioned, the launch of the tool was simply premature. Had they waited to identify the target market better, position the product within that target market, and follow a release plan catered to that positioning, Wave would likely have been a far more successful tool. And the buzz that was created at the initial launch would have been able to have been followed up with a marketing plan that ramped up teams needing this type of collaboration tool, and really done a phenomenal job of getting where and we'd be talking about Wave today, but we're not. All right, so we've gone through manager, we've gone through marketer. The third one is the user. So the third stakeholder. Now you might be thinking users, well, yeah, there's probably thousands, if not millions of different perspectives because you got thousands or millions of different users, right? That there's no way to predict what any one user wants. And to some extent that's true, but there are also a lot of vast similarities between users in terms of their wants and needs, particularly for a product that you're developing that solves that need or want. And these can be broken down into simple set of goals or motivations that these users might have, whether it's their experience goals, which are more visceral, immediate, emotional wants that they have. Things like, I want to feel inspired by this product, or I want to eliminate all the boredom that I have. You know, and then so the second one is end goals, right? Which is kind of a mid-level cognitive task where you want to complete some sort of behavior or do some action. And if you can identify what those specific end goals are, you can help create something that solves it. Like, I want to add items to a shopping cart, or I want to complete my transaction. And then there's a third type of goal called life goals, which these are more long-term goals or characteristics that an individual wants to develop about themselves. You know, so they might say, I want to be more productive, or I want to support local music, or I just want to be a good friend, right? And sometimes these life goals can help define why an individual wants to use a certain type of product. And if you can really dig in and understand these users and what they want, and especially like a cohort of users, a group of people that are all very similar, that all want to accomplish the same thing, then you have a basis on which to design a product. And that's where understanding the user comes in, is transitioning into design. And so to make good design, you can want to create something that is considerate of the users and puts that grounds the user, puts the user first rather than some process or outside entity first. It's about designing systems or products that tend to be smart, that can predict what the user wants, or starts preparing for whatever they're requiring. Like, for example, when I go to Google and I start typing in their search engine, right? They did something really kind of simple. I mean, you think about Google and their homepage, it's extremely, extremely simple design. They basically have their logo and a text box. But what does Google do to make that a smart design? When you start typing in your search, it will pop up suggestions based on what you've typed so far. It's a very simple thing, but allows you to find what you're looking for even faster. All right. And then good design also today has to include some sort of social component. I mean, because think about it, humans, we all like to interact with other people to some extent. I mean, I suppose there's a few hermits and people out there, but the rest of us, like our friends, like our family, want to spend time with them, interact with them in some way. And so having good design can accomplish those things. And when you take that design and you want to apply it to some product, you have to think about things in more than just a superficial way, more than just the colors on your website or your app, or you're developing a game and knowing, well, we have a sequence of things, but how can we design it in such a way that the users are really going to love it and get integrated with it, right? So that can fail too if you don't fully understand the user when you're developing a product. And so I got a third example. This one comes from Facebook. All right. So how many of you are familiar with Facebook's attempt at owning the smartphone interface? So in 2013, Facebook released an app that replaced the lock screen and the home screen on Android devices with a new interface called Facebook Home. And Facebook put a ton of money into this project. A lot of marketing went into it. They had co-branding with a smartphone manufacturer called HTC that would have it pre-installed. The Facebook Home app would make Facebook newsfeed and chat the centerpiece of the phone. And there was reviews by some professional, tech people who gave the app very positive reviews for sophistication and technical polish. Yet after 1 million downloads of this app, user reviews on Google's App Store were extremely poor at about 2 out of 5. And today, Facebook Home is no longer available. So what happened? Well, you can kind of guess where it's going, but I want to get a little more specific. First, well, in the technology world, and this tends to be a general truth, users pick a platform first, then the apps. So in terms of smartphones, this means the users pick Android or iPhone first, then the apps. Well, because Facebook Home was originally built for Android phones, only Android users used it. But Facebook didn't understand the common Android user. So Android had, at the time, the capability of using widgets, folders, and docks, things that iPhones weren't capable yet of doing. But part of the problem was that the Facebook Home developers were iPhone users, not Android users. So they didn't see the necessity of including these, widgets, folders, and docks, and including them on the Facebook Home app. When these developers tested Facebook Home, they didn't miss any of those features, whereas Android users did miss them. So that was error number 1. Error number 2, Facebook built a product that only Facebook fanatics would want. Most Facebook users wanted to partition off their usage of Facebook such that they get to choose for themselves when to open the app or not. Facebook Home made that impossible. It was always in your face. It was always there. Whenever you looked at your lock screen, whenever you went to your home screen. Furthermore, Facebook Home hid other apps from the lock and home screens, making it hard to even find these other tools that most users wanted to use. So again, unless you were a fanatic of Facebook, Facebook Home had no appeal. And so even though this was a technologically really great tool, they did a great job marketing it. Presumably they managed the project well. They did not understand their users, and hence the app failed. Now, I talked about 3 of the stakeholders. The 4th one is the technology professional. Now, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details on that simply because most of you are presumably very familiar with that. That's what you're going through your training in your college, right? But I want you to realize is that what you do, if you want to be great at your careers, to consistently make good decisions about the technology you're developing, you need to understand these other stakeholders. I mean, you don't have to be experts at management or an expert at marketing or an expert at design, but the better you can think in those terms, the better you will be able to do your job. It's not enough to be good with technology. All of you can do that. It's the other perspectives, the other stakeholders, where you may be missing context. And as my examples show, even big tech companies such as IBM, Google, and Facebook do great work with technology, but still sometimes struggle with these other perspectives. And when they do, their products fail. So this is the one lesson where I'd like to end. And for you to be successful, you need to think. You need to think deeply and objectively as possible, and consider all the important stakeholders in any technology you develop. Success requires that you see these stakeholder perspectives, to understand their underlying assumptions and beliefs, to appreciate the facts that led to their beliefs, whether it's facts about managing technology projects, marketing virtual collaboration tools, or designing social media apps for users. The better you understand the breadth and depth of these stakeholder perspectives, the better your engineering and development efforts will be. So stakeholders shouldn't be just thought of as some buzzword. It's a tool for improving your thinking and to help you to innovate and develop products that will amaze the world. And that is your task, to go out and change the world, to innovate, to build, to make this world more amazing than it already is. I look forward to that world. Thank you. Now, I'll leave it open to any questions and I would love to answer anything that you may have.
Wow, 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 wow. I think, first of all, I think it was a very unique talk because Dr. Drake, we're very, we come from, I think, a culture where we just so heavily dependent on slides. So this was a very unique experience because, it was you presenting and you talking about your experiences and talking to us about what you think is important and what the roles of each of these stakeholders was. So I think it was a fabulous, a very, very inspiring talk that you gave us. I am opening up the floor for questions. I would like to welcome, we've got a couple of our alumni as well who've joined us. Omer is here from Australia. He's joined. Omer, he is also supporting me with the subject, but he's also an alumni. And of course, our students are here as well. So I've already got, I think, a question on the chat. I will read this out. Okay, so it says, can you provide some insight on why a project will fail, even though it would be successful during the design and implementation phase, but will fail come release phase if marketing and branding is not properly established?
I'm trying to see if I can get the entire context of the question there. How can a project fail even, and assume that meant after, even though the product was finished and went on. There's usually, and when you talk to people in project management, there's usually a couple definitions they have for failure. But a big one tends to be, it goes over budget or it takes too long. And those tend to be the general definition of a project failure. Even if the project gets done, if it's way over budget or takes way too long, then it's considered a failure. So I don't know, is there more to, I don't know if there's more context or I can add to that. So even, so you can still finish a project, and basically you can take as long as you want to finish any project. But, you work in a business world, if you take too long, someone else is going to do it and your product's not going to be of any use anymore. So that's just a necessity of, working in the business world.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think at this point, I'd like to go back to that first, the case that you started with, which was your own experience. Could you tell us give us a little bit insight of why actually the company failed?
Why the company failed?
Yeah. So,
I mean, so this is, again, I have to look back 23 years and my memory of this is, I'm getting a little older. So no, the big issue was that they were trying to make money off of advertising and nobody wanted to do it yet. And so like I mentioned, we had a great product. We had great commentary that we were displaying about these sporting teams. It was, I was impressed with it, and and I was a young, recent grad at that time, but I could tell the quality of the product we were coming out with. I knew that we were having financial problems though when, after about 9 months, they're like, oh, we're going to change our business model and try to make money in a different way, which told me they weren't making money.
Yeah.
That's the only reason why a business would change their business model at that point. And so fortunately for my sake, I saw the writing on the wall and already had my resume ready to be sent back out. But yeah, why it failed is basically they were trying to do things that were a little bit too soon. Had they waited another 5 years, that same company would have been a roaring success. But then there would have been bigger competitors jumping in on it too. So I don't know if there was an easy solution to that.
And isn't that fascinating? Because if we think about cases like Amazon, right? They started selling books online when nobody else was thinking about doing something like that, right? So a lot of people would say that, oh, but they were ahead of their time, but they managed. They managed to capture that market, and they managed to do it really well as an e-business. So in this case, if we had to compare two companies like this, two cases like this, what would you think would be the primary, success factors where Amazon was concerned?
So, primary success factors of Amazon. I would say one of the smart things that Jeff Bezos did early in the creation of Amazon was pick an industry where he knew they could scale quickly, that had a product that was differentiatable. In other words, a book is a book. Once you know the title of the book, you know what's going to be in it. And so it really didn't matter. So this was really early, before people had developed trust in e-commerce. So yeah, I mean, you have to put this into context. Today we think it's no big deal buying all kinds of products. In 1995, I guess, when Amazon started, nobody bought things like that. I mean, there was mail order catalogs, I think, back then. That was about the only thing that existed. So people could buy things at a distance, but buying things online, nobody did. So you had to have a product that people knew what it was, so they would be confident that the product that they ordered would be the one they got.
Right.
Or something like clothing, well, that you never know quite how it's going to fit, or if the design looks like the picture. So there's too many unknowns, right? And so, but the book was a perfect choice. I think that was one big thing that they did right early on. And that, I think, well, and this is probably true for a lot of entrepreneurs, is, Jeff Bezos worked his butt off. He was probably, I don't know his exact work schedule, but I wouldn't be surprised if he worked 90 and 100 hours a week every week for like 5 years just to get past that growth stage.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the next question that I'm seeing kind of feeds off of what we just talked about earlier on. The question was, what makes marketing so important that even the less sophisticated would succeed if proper marketing and branding is established, while a well-designed and implemented product might fail if the same is not properly applied?
Why is marketing so important that even less sophisticated products succeed, whereas more advanced products don't? I mean, there's a case study on, I guess, VHS versus beta cassette players, and I'm not sure if this is certainly within the U.S. I'm not sure how worldwide this played out, but there was two formats for video tapes back in the day, back when I was a kid. Actually, even later than that, they had high definition versus, I guess it was Blu-ray versus HD DVDs. And so there's, I mean, please understand, marketing is not my background, so I've read a few books on it. That's about it. So I don't want to try to go too deep into the reasons why one would fail or not, but it's just a fact that I've observed over and over again, that good marketing can take and so product, and it can sell, versus even if you have a great sophisticated product, if you don't market it well, then it can just sit there and nobody uses it or adopts it. That's an observation that I've seen. Now, if you want to dig deeper into that, yes, there's there's marketing programs that will teach you those types of things.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you're right, I think, because even we've noticed, like, really sucky products or services, right? And they do so well, and they're so savvy in the way they're marketing to their customers. They're really talking their language. And it's a lot of times that's all that is, it's just because people just may not be aware of something better out there. and they only know this one, which is so good at marketing and positioning itself, that people kind of automatically veer towards it, right? Like the confirmation psychology that you just talked about. Okay, I have another question. It says, does misinformation negatively impact e-marketing and e-commerce? And if so, how would somebody counter it if I had a startup company or a company, e-business?
If misinformation, was that correct?
Misinformation. I'm just going to copy this thing into as well.
If you're talking more about a product, misinformation about a product that you're trying to sell will quickly be discovered and will negatively impact the success of that product. I mean, it may work short term, not long term. Misinformation generally tends to be used more often in terms of politics, where people will only look at things, look for sound bites, only want a short-term response, and then they quickly move on. That's the only way it can propagate and continue to be successful. When it comes to products, I mean, there have been products that have been sold widely and don't live up to their marketing hype, but that tends to get called out pretty quick and doesn't last very long. And that's just the nature of the marketplace, tends to do that. So that would be my thoughts on that.
All right. I don't see any more questions in the chat. Anybody in the audience has any questions? I'm happy if somebody wants to raise their hand or put up another question in the chat. I can read it out. I can see someone sending something through. Okay. Okay, yeah. So it says, Dr. Drake, why did you think about so many different stakeholders? If I had to do a startup, would I have to think of every single stakeholder that you mentioned, or just my customers and the immediate people like my employees?
So if you were a startup, so one of the challenges of thinking through stakeholders is knowing which stakeholders are most critical to the success of your business. In my first example, like when the problem with the stakeholders was not one of the 4 major ones I even mentioned in my textbook and in this talk today. It was a problem with not necessarily the users, but who are their actual customers, which were the advertisers, the people advertising with them. And that's who they did not understand. So it's part of understanding what is your business model, who are the key peoples involved in that business model, and understanding their perspectives before you get started. You can have lots of different stakeholders, and like I mentioned, the primary stakeholders, the manager, the marketer, the user, and the technology professional. But there's a lot of other ones, and like in my textbook, I go into like a security specialist and a systems analyst and a digital
SEO specialist.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different specialists that could be important to this, or your vendors. Vendors can oftentimes be stakeholders depending on your type of business. So yeah, I mean, as a startup though, as an entrepreneur, you have to understand who those stakeholders are, and then understand what perspectives they would bring to the table. And in particular, to try to think through how are you helping solve their problems or make their problems better, especially for things like users or vendors or whatever. But getting inside their head and understanding where they're coming from.
Because of what you've said, maybe this is like a question I got. If a company misunderstood its users, is there any comeback from something like that?
I mean, yeah. I mean, if you can, it depends. I'll say that. right? So it depends on how badly they misunderstand their users, and do they have multiple different products? So if one product they developed doesn't meet the users, you still might have other products that do. Like from my example, like Facebook, didn't understand their users, but it's still used by billions of people worldwide, right? So they're still doing something right. Although I tend to use Facebook a lot less than I used to. But and I think partly is that they're starting to lose touch with their users, and that's why we're seeing more people moving to other platforms. It's because of that. Yeah, so the more you lose touch with the users, the harder it is to keep developing and improving your products to meet their needs. And eventually people are going to walk away.
So wouldn't it be a near impossible mission to do something like that, particularly if you're a company like Facebook, which is dealing in an online platform, right? Like customers' needs are changing so fast, right? When it comes to, let's say, social media and how people interact with social media. Today they want to upload a video, tomorrow they want to be able to edit that video, day after they want to add filters, and so it's constantly evolving what they want out of this, right? So how realistic would it be for an e-business to always try and keep that as their focus? Like, how much would then their product keep evolving and changing? And would that deter from their primary product, or would that only be of benefit?
Yeah, I mean, you do have to be continuously innovating, absolutely. But you also have to keep sight of the core product. And I think that's a struggle a lot of businesses have. They have their core that they know is successful, but if they just stick to their core, eventually somebody's going to come up with something new that will, put them out of business, right? So you have to innovate as well, but you also have to keep an eye on that core. And it's really, really hard to find that right balance. And I think that's one of the reasons why executives should get paid a lot of money, is that their job is to figure out that balance, right? How much to innovate versus how much to maintain the core of what the users want. But yeah, if you don't innovate, you will find your business. I mean, presumably most of you have heard of MySpace. I'm not sure in your area what were some of the bigger social media companies 10 years ago before Facebook. Well, Facebook was already pretty big 10 years ago, 15 years ago, right? There were other social media companies, social networking companies that were popular around the world, but today it's Facebook. But what's it going to be in 10 years from now? That's why Facebook has to try to keep innovating and coming up with new ways of doing things. But if they don't stay in touch with what the users really want,
right?
Yeah,
right. Absolutely. I think that's exactly what you said is right. That being able to strike that balance, and that's why executives should get paid more, because they're the ones who are, they've given the burden to figure out what that balance is. And I think most of the time, you're right, companies do that well. Something interesting that maybe we want to throw at you from the Middle East perspective. So we've seen this happen a couple of times. We had a local company called Souq.com, which launched in about 2006. It was one of the very early stages where here people weren't really keen on doing any kind of shopping online. Souq was kind of selling, door-to-door things from different vendors and bringing it to you and stuff. But they did really well, and people loved Souq, right? Like everybody knew Souq, and by way before pandemic, people were using Souq a lot. They were depending on it, and because it grew to what it was, Amazon kind of bought it out. Right, so then and it was an overnight thing that it was Souq and then it became Amazon, right? But Amazon hasn't been as popular as Souq was, right? And in turn, there were other local companies that kind of popped up. Now there's Noon and there's InstaShop and things like that, which seem to again become a lot more popular than Amazon. Have you seen this kind of trend anywhere else, or is it just us? Like, we love our local companies.
No, yeah, I've heard stories similar to that. Whether it's India, China, that sometimes culturally there is a hesitancy to use some of these big name companies, and it could just be a few bad experiences, and the stories spread quickly about it. That can happen, or it's just the culture says we liked something that has a more personal feel to it, as in local feel to it. So yeah, that absolutely is true and does occur.
And I think Uber was smart because we have again a local company which used the same model called Kareem. Again, Kareem's very popular. Uber bought them, but they didn't change the names.
So
So
like
we've
same
still
branding,
got the
yeah.
Uber and we've still got the Kareem, and they're both working really well.
Yeah, and that brings, and that's a marketing thing. That's called branding, right? And so knowing how to brand your company in different locations is an important part of that as well.
Yeah, and I think with Souk, what had happened, like a lot of because we did go around doing a little bit of like study to understand why, as part of the
Mhm.
subjects that we teach, and a lot of the users who were heavily dependent on Souk and really liked the Souk, one they said this, the familiarity, that the fact that it was Souk, it felt more like a home brand, and the second thing was actually they felt the service quality was so much better when it was
Right.
Souk versus when it was Amazon. So it's fascinating that a giant like Amazon wasn't able to grasp this. You'd think they would know because they've obviously done this in so many other places. But Uber got it right. You know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the thing, people are not infallible with their thinking, and as
Yeah,
I just mentioned, and so your goal should be, though, to try to think through these issues.
right.
Better you can do that, the better your success will
Absolutely.
be. And so it sounds like Uber did that approach better, at least in the Middle East, than Amazon did.
Yeah, yes. All right. I don't see any more questions coming through. So I think we are almost at the end of our session. I would like to, of course, thank you so much for giving us this time, spending this time with us, and giving us such an amazing insight. It was like a very nice summary of everything we've kind of done throughout the semester, particularly the chapters that we looked at from your book as well. So, and I think it's a perfect way to end our semester for the students. So, thank you so much once again for coming here, giving us the time, agreeing to come and join our session, and of course, answering all our amazing, crazy questions that we've thrown at you.
It was my pleasure.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you to the audience, of course, all the students, and everybody who's been sending us the questions. Omar, thank you so much. Umair, thank you so much for joining from Australia. I know it must be really weird hours for you as well. And it's great to have the students joining and interacting with you. We do hope to have you maybe in Dubai sometime in the near future when it's maybe not COVID. But till then, virtually, definitely, we would definitely want to have you over again in the near future. Thank you so much, Dr. Drake.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye.